I'm just going to go ahead and get started. So my name's Eric Whitner. I'm the product manager for procedural technology, part of the 3D team. I'm responsible for CityEngine as a product, but also the procedural capabilities of CityEngine that have been brought into ArcGIS Pro with symbology. The procedural capabilities have been brought into geoprocessing as the feature from CityEngine rules tool, and kind of the larger future of procedural, where we're going to take that technology next as we look to moving it into the server and onto the web in the long term. I'm also responsible for the interactive analytical tools. You might have been seeing some of those in ArcGIS Pro or on the runtime, also in CityEngine, across the platform, and making sure that we get a common experience every place we add those. And I'm focused on urban design as a practice, and trying to create tools that support that. And at the end, if we have time, I might try and touch on a new offering we're thinking about creating called ArcGIS Urban, what that might look like, and maybe show you guys some prototypes. So procedural, what is procedural? First of all, how many of you are CityEngine users? Okay, so there's 5 of you. So the rest of you haven't touched CityEngine before. So what is the procedural technology? The idea is that you capture a style, be it an architectural style or a streetscape style or a type of vegetation in a rule, and then by changing attributes on that rule, you can change its appearance without having to re-hand model it. So it's a way to create content quickly by capturing it all in a rule-based system. And the advantage of that is if you're trying to create huge amounts of 3D data, cities or countries, where you don't have existing 3D models, you can create a rule and apply it to many, many buildings and create a large data set. But in the design space, when you're trying to create a proposed building, it allows you to create more buildings faster, more scenarios faster, so that you can do more alternatives and try and get to a better alternative more quickly. Now, of course, you have to write the rule that you're going to use. That takes a little bit of time. It actually takes a little bit more time than hand modeling a building. But once you have that rule done, you can reuse it many times to speed things up. The other thing that's interesting about procedural technology is it's less about creating just beautiful visuals, but you can actually insert information into it. So because the building is building itself from a rule, it's creating its height, its floors, it's dividing those into spaces. It knows that on the first floor it's commercial and on the floors above it's residential. It can tell you things about itself. It can tell you how much floor area it has of a different use based on that floor area, how many dwelling units it's going to have, how much electricity they're going to consume, how much gray water they're going to produce, right? So it actually can create information based on these procedural rules. The other thing it can do is it can display itself thematically. So it could, for instance, display itself as commercial, red on the first floor, then offices blue above that, or even more sophisticated representations of performance. So it could split itself out to have roofs color-coded in light blue to dark blue, and the darker the blue, it means the more water that roof is capturing, not letting into a stormwater system. So you could use it as a way to kind of do 3D thematic mapping across your scene. So CityEngine's been around for a while. Initially, it was really focused on the entertainment world, building cool 3D cities for movies and games. When we kind of peeked over the fence and took a look at the technology, we said, what you really have here is a really powerful urban planning tool. So we're refocusing CityEngine on these urban planning workflows for rapidly creating context around a design, iteratively creating multiple designs, and then sharing that with people, either through the web or actually pushing it back to your enterprise GIS system, be that ArcGIS Line or Enterprise, so that you can share it with other people. And we've been adding a few things to try and make that easier. The first one is last year we added this new function called GetMap. Basically, you get a little web interface inside CityEngine. You define your area of interest, and then you can actually reach out to Esri servers, pull out a piece of imagery, pull out a clip of the World Elevation Service for that area. That comes into CityEngine. It goes to OpenStreetMap, looks at OpenStreetMap, tries to find all the street segments in there, all the buildings. You can add all kinds of data from OpenStreetMap. Massages those attributes a little bit, has a rule built in that can create urban forms on top of that data you get from OpenStreetMap. You can modify the parameters in that rule to display different ways, simple white boxes, or you can apply kind of prototypical textures to try and create a realistic representation, right? And then create a representation of the place where you're going to do your project. The idea was to give architects and engineers the ability to get to a 3D representation of an urban design without having to do any GIS data massaging. So that all took about 1 minute, 2 minutes to create that. And again, it's dependent on all the open source data, so the quality varies over the world, but any place you have good OpenStreetMap, you can get to that. We're also continuing to add new functions to CityEngine continuously. One of the big requests that we've been getting is for designers, they want to be able to tell you things about their design in the scene, be able to do interactive analytics on the fly. So we added in 3D measurement tools for distance, 3D measurement tools for area. We're going to be adding a 3D measurement tool for volume, so you can tell all that information just live in scene. The next question they asked us to start solving was visibility. So if I put an observer and he has full 360-degree view, when can he see my proposed building? What if he's going down this route? I'm going to move him down the route. Show me when my proposed design is going to be visible. And we're going to continue to add these kind of analytic tools as we go forward. One of the historic limitations of the procedural method was when I generate a model, there's only so much variation that as I put into the rule. So if I write the rule and I expose a parameter and I say the windows are going to be 1 meter wide, every window on that building is going to be 1 meter wide. But what if I have one window near the edge or one row or column of windows that I want to eliminate? Because it was rule driven, there was no easy way to do that. So last year we exposed something what's called local edits. What local edits allow you to do is touch the whole procedural model, pull out the pieces of it that were built by the rule, and change individual parameters on pieces. So I could select a row of windows or a column of windows or an individual window and change their size. Or I could select the panel that's in. I could change it from a window to a balcony or to a blank wall. So all of a sudden I'm starting to be able to change the minutia of a building that I'm procedurally rendering. And that's actually pushing CityEngine away from kind of a mass creation tool into actually a 3D design tool where you can write really sophisticated rules and change things individually. And then one of the other complaints was I want the thing that I procedurally generate to understand its context. And so we started adding our first context-sensitive capabilities within CGA. So in this case, we have a tree in the top left. That tree says when I get too close to a wall that my canopy is going to conflict with that wall, I'm going to make myself smaller so that I don't conflict. If I get under a threshold, I'm just going to not make myself as a tree. I'm going to disappear. So I can actually drive the generation of things by the context that they are in the scene. And we're going to continue to expand on this capability as we move forward. CityEngine, of course, is an ESRI product, and we have many products, and we have a giant platform, and we want them to play together. So one of the things we added last year was the ability to support editable feature layers inside CityEngine. So I've brought in an ArcGIS Online editable feature layer, edit it, right? Select that piece. I'm going to cut it out, right? That change is synchronized back to ArcGIS Online. On the left side, we have ArcGIS Pro. As I mentioned, Pro has the same procedural engine, so it's using the exact same rule. The CityEngine is on the right, but wrapped as a rule package. You can see the change reflected in the building on the left. So this is kind of the long-term direction of where CityEngine is going to go, it's going to be integrated into your GIS enterprise. And the reason why is because we want to be able to support everything that you see in CityEngine coming from a service so that you can simultaneously and collaboratively edit things in CityEngine as seen with participants who are not in the same location or who are maybe working in a charrette environment around multiple computers in a room. And of course, it's not just geometry, it's the attributes and everything that sync as well. And then we'll become a consumer of the i3S services. So last year, we started seriously pursuing virtual reality and augmented reality. The kind of first thing we did was this ArcGIS 360 VR, which was a mobile VR experience built in Gear VR as an app. One-click publishing from CityEngine, and then you export the file and put it on ArcGIS Online. What we've heard the users, we've heard the demands that the Gear VR thing is still too much of a barrier of entry. So we're working on this, which is a web-based viewer of 360 VRs. Has a desktop mode, so you can take a look at the VR experience you've authored on the desktop, but then you'll switch into that two-screen mode, and then drop your phone, because it'll run on a mobile device, into a cardboard, and then you'll have a lightweight VR with no native app installation, just running in the browser. So we're hoping that'll get the cost down to mobile VR down to like $5 for people who want to be able to deliver that experience to folks. And then people who are interested in the more high-end, we added a new export format last year for the Unreal game engine made by Epic Games. So if you've played any Rainbow Six Vegas, a lot of the Ubisoft games are built on Unreal. But they're one of the two big gaming engines out there, Unreal and Unity. And so you can take a CityEngine scene, export to Datasmith, open Unreal. This is Unreal Editor. Import that Datasmith, and then all of a sudden, boom, you have your CityEngine scene in Unreal. You can then use that to create a game out of it that's interactive, so you can give people that first-person view. They can run around with a game controller. Unreal supports VR and AR, but we did a partnership with Epic and HOK, the architecture firm, on looking at this, and their primary interest was actually using Unreal and Unreal's real-time rendering capabilities to produce graphics like this. So this is just the rendering done directly in the game engine, kicked out as a screenshot. And you can actually produce some really nice looking stuff just from the gaming engines. And Pascal's, he's got a session in this room at 5:30. He's going to talk about Unity and Unreal and how we support game engines across the platform in a little more detail. And then we also last year focused on improving our just ease of use, cleaning up our user experience, cleaning up our user interface, try and make it easier to do. And we're gonna keep working on that. You're probably gonna see some significant changes at the end of this year that are driven by modifications we're making to the editing tools. So what's coming? So I mentioned we have feature layer synchronization. I mentioned the visibility analysis. I mentioned the Unreal export. One of the things that CityEngine can do is it can take the buildings that you're creating, the streets that you're creating, use them as a way to modify terrain and shape terrain. But in CityEngine, now you have a shaped terrain, you export those out to ArcGIS, and you have no way to get that terrain out of there. So we're going to solve that. We're going to produce what's called terrain packages directly out of CityEngine, so you can import those and stand up elevation surfaces from CityEngine on ArcGIS Online, so that everything you produce will drape well. And then we're also looking at supporting mobile scene packages that will come out of it as well. We're going to be adding new CGA functions, probably mostly focused around context, mostly to drive zoning visualization and maximum build-out visualization. We're going to completely redo the editing and drawing tools. Some of our customers have been saying, we're really good on creating all the 3D, but they do all their 2D drawing still in SketchUp and then just transfer it over and apply the rules to get their 3D. So we need to spend some time on actually improving our drawing tools so that they can do that work within CityEngine, and we're going to expand our rule library and add more libraries. We're also going to improve feature layer by adding auto sync, so a rule is automatically applied if it's a polygon layer with no Z's, that it gets draped to ground, that it syncs automatically at intervals. New interactive tools. Those of you that are CityEngine users, if you scream louder for the interactive tool you want, it's more likely to come sooner. The loudest people right now are saying cross sections. They want to generate interactive cross sections as graphics and then be able to export those as vectors, scalable vector graphics that can go into Illustrator that they can modify. So that's the tool that's winning at the moment. 360 VR, we're going to add in support for 360 photos. So you just grab a folder's 360 photos, drop them into CityEngine, they get geo-referenced, and then you can export them out in that experience. I mentioned the web viewer, and then I'm sure all of you noticed ArcGIS Pro has the named user license model. We're going to follow that lead, and we'll be releasing a named user version of CityEngine by the end of the year based on named user 2 with a term license, but we will not not be getting rid of single use and concurrent use. In fact, concurrent use just came back onto the sales list for CityEngine. So you can still get the old stuff, but the new named user model will be out there. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some case studies and use cases of using CityEngine to create streets and open spaces. I'm going to start with this example from Fair and Piers. So Fair and Piers is a transportation company in the San Francisco Bay Area. They worked with Alameda County Transportation Commission. And what Alameda County was trying to do is understand how they needed to change their transportation network to better support multimodal transportation, better support driverless vehicles in the future. So they had multiple scenarios, the existing condition, 20 years, 40 years, 40 years where everything is self-driving and all of a sudden parking spaces are less important, and then also looking at different demographic change patterns. And so they did some GIS analysis, classic GIS analysis, to discover what recommendations they could make per every single segment of road in Alameda County. So what do we do to this road to make it better for a pedestrian or a bicyclist or a car or a self-driving car or a bus, right? They broke it out, and then they had a recommendation on a segment-by-segment basis. So now they've got all these representations. They can say, okay, for this segment, we're going to do this, this, and this. What do we do with that? So there was a huge diversity of street types, from huge highways down to little single-lane arterials, and they wanted to be able to show people what those looked like, what that change looked like. So they used procedural rules to generate all the different conditions and all the different scenarios for each of those segments procedurally. But the rules also generated analytics on how much that improved or actually decreased, in some cases, the quality of the road for different types of transportation. And because of the ability to change things just by changing parameters, rather than changing parameters manually, they were actually using GIS to set all the parameters on these segments. So they did some analytics, they categorized the improvements by segment, they combined a procedural rule with it, and they generated these visualizations out of it. So they had visualizations for 900 plus arterials. The total polygon count in all the scenes was 250 million polygons. The time involved in procedural generating this was pretty rough. So they actually chunked it out and parallelized their procedural process. So they ran it on multiple machines side by side to make it run more quickly. This is kind of one of the first examples of doing that. So they used a rule set called the Complete Streets Rule, which was initially developed at Esri about 5 years ago, and then the guy who worked on it actually went and moved and started working for Fairs and Piers. They realized that it was actually capable of generating these baseline conditions, these proposed improvements at scale, doing thousands of segments, and generating all the metrics based on these scenarios. So there's a couple videos out there, a couple reports on this project. Highly recommend checking them out. But what I wanted to do is actually show you guys the Complete Streets Rule in action. You can get the Complete Streets Rule, just go to arcgis.com and you do a search for Complete Streets, it pops right out. You download the whole rule, you can download the examples of how this rule is applied, launch CityEngine, and give it a try. You can actually also get to it directly in CityEngine as one of the examples, but there's newer versions available on arcgis.com than are available inside CityEngine. It's an active project, so it's got its own GitHub page. People are branching it and doing their own versions. So there's a woman working on a customized Singapore version with covered walkways and driving in the opposite direction. There's a Vancouver flavor that's kind of growing and evolving right now. So if you're interested in developing custom streets rules, it's worth it to take a look at that. So let's take a look at streets. Okay, so I'm going to start with the basics of streets, since there's a bunch of people who aren't CityEngine users. This is a little piece of Paris that Jack bought and burned our name into. Just kidding. So streets are composed of some pretty simple geometry. I'm going to turn off the shape so we can take a look at it. So it's what's called a graph. So you have graph and you have these segments, and they define the center lines of the street. If I look at the graph, right, it's got some metrics. It knows how wide the street is in total. You can offset the street, give it a bias to one side or the other. You can set how big the sidewalks are on each side. And then the precision controls when you go around a turn, right, how many times it divides that and how much geometry it makes to try and represent that turn. Higher precision means more geometry, which might be heavier. You might not like that. Low precision, at some point, it just gets to making like a single joint if you're trying to do a curve. Now, what this creates is a set of shapes on top of it. So we have a shape here that represents the laned area that we're going to put cars or bike lanes or bus routes, right? And then on top of that shape, we have a procedural rule that creates the style of that street. So it's actually putting in the striping, the lane divisions, et cetera. Same thing for the sidewalks. So again, procedural rule on the sidewalks to create the sidewalks, and then you can make decisions about whether you scatter people on those sidewalks or vegetation or planters. So this is a pretty simple example. Streets can be imported from GIS, right? Any line feature class can become a set of streets that can be brought in from OpenStreetMap. You can create them yourself. So if I go in and start sketching some streets, right? Create a street. Anytime a street completely encloses an area, that area becomes a block, and then the block has the option of subdividing itself into lots automatically. And so when we're working with buildings, that allows us to kind of really quickly create representations of kind of greenfield development. You close in an area, boom, you get a whole bunch of buildings there, and then you can control the dispersion of lots and parcels on top of that. So this is the kind of the most basic example of a street rule. Let's take a look at the complete streets. It's going to take a sec. Okay, so again, you can see I've got my graph network, I've got my shapes subdivided on, I've got some buildings as context, and then here's the complete streets rule as it's applied. If I select it, on the top right here, this is what's called the inspector. This is where all the rule parameters are stored for the streets rule. I'm going to zoom in and take a look at some of the capabilities of this complete streets rule. So the only thing that is coming into this right now is a line. And CityEngine is generating all the rest of these features dynamically as a procedural output. So if I go in, so you'll notice like here's one of the parameters. I've angled nosed in parking, right? I could eliminate the parking from the side of the street. Procedural takes it out, disappears, it recalculates the remaining amount of area, figures out what to put there. In this case, it's going to put some additional lanes. I'll do angled back in, right? So I've got angled back in on the side of it. I can change parameters that are very specific. So width is a little tricky. Width, if I'm looking at a street, left to right. Length is ahead of me. So if I want to make a parking space wider, I'm increasing its length because we're talking in transportation terms. So I can modify these features and make it deeper or narrower, right? And just simply by changing a couple parameters, I can change a lot of features. This is a pretty exhaustive list of things you can do with a street. So right now I have a striped double yellow line. I could change the style of that line to support another line. I may want to insert something down the middle of the street, so I'm going to give it a median. So I say I want the street to have a median. Let's make it 1 meter wide, right? So it splits it out, figures out how much is remaining for the streets, generates some planters at regular intervals, right? And then drops some trees in there, all procedurally done. Or I could say this is going to be kind of a more ugly Jersey barrier style and spread Jersey barriers along that street. Let's take a look at some bike lanes. So bike lanes is really what one of the main things that Complete Streets is about. If I grab a street segment and I go down and I look at the reports, and I mentioned, rules do reports and metrics, right? It's telling me all these things about how much paint this street's going to actually lose, what's the width of the lanes, how much asphalt is going to be used in it, the typical braking distance based on the length of the segment, which is a calculation that indicates bicycle safety. But it's also calculating the stress indicators for the bicyclist to understand how impacted they are. So I can make changes to the bike lanes just by changing some parameters. So let's see. I'm going to make it a 4-meter bike lane on one side of the road that's two-way, and I want appended stripes is not enough for me, so I'm going to put, let's see. Well, first of all, I'm going to make this the Redlands red color, buffer protections enabled, and give it some spacing. Buffer type, let's do a cycle track with planters on the sides of it to give it some protection. So just an idea, all I'm doing here is changing parameters, and these parameters can be linked to attributes that are in your GIS features, and it's actually changing some pretty complex geometry. If I want, I can start adding people to my scene, put some more vehicles on the streets. Maybe I want some bicycles. Bicyclists are actually going to be on this bike lane, right? Using it. It's smart, right? It's putting them going in the right way so they don't collide with each other. But yeah, just another example of kind of the depth of this rule set. Let's take a look at another feature of it. Let's create some bus lanes. So one of the purposes of this is, of course, to encourage bus rapid transit and high occupancy vehicle. So there's a whole section of it that's focused specifically on adding those kinds of features. So let's see. Here we go. So I'm going to add bus lanes, and there's not enough space for, I'll do bus lanes on both sides, and that squeezes out all the cars. So now I just have parking, which doesn't make sense so I'm going to turn off the parallel parking, right? And I've just turned this into a bus rapid transit line going down the city. So, very cool rule set, very simple and easy to use to make really complex geometries. You can then export these as models, take them as a pyramid mesh, publish them into ArcGIS Online, and consume them in a web scene, or generate reports off of them. A variety of things you can do. So I wanted to touch next on kind of how we can create open spaces around these street areas and kind of intermixed with a set of buildings. So this is another example rule set that you can get with CityEngine. It's called the 3D Transect. It's got a whole collection of rules called the Building Construction Toolset that generate buildings, streets, open space. It's got something called the Advanced Streets Rule, which is one step down from complexity and difficulty from the Complete Streets. So if having 196 parameters is a little bit too much, you can take a look at the Advanced Street Rule. The way it's organized is around the kind of new urbanist concept of transects. So transect 1 through 6 represents a kind of a continuing increase in density as you go. So if we go in and we take a look at, transect 1, it's really kind of a natural zone, maybe with one house, or maybe kind of more of a rural area. And we've got a procedural rule here called building construction that's generating this building, and then we have another rule that's making decisions about scattering vegetation across this landscape at various densities. So I can actually make decisions and say, okay, you know what, this is going to be farmland. So I want basically no trees, and I'm just going to make it kind of bare ground, or maybe I want it to be a forest, right? I'm going to make a lot of trees, and it's going to kind of crowd the area. You can also make, let's take a look at this area. Rather than having natural landscapes, you can create formal park spaces. So it's subdividing the area that I gave it into walking paths. It's making decisions about, putting different types of tile textures on those pads. It's got controls for hedges and hedge density. So whether these green spaces and open spaces are surrounded by hedges, and then also, again, putting in trees. And in this case, because it's a public space, it's dropping people in there as well. So you can create, both natural and really formal open spaces. So as you imagine, kind of as you go up the transect level, right, you get more and more density. So this is kind of an example of a similar rule, but not quite as complex for streets. Up into the mid-rise, heading towards kind of a high-rise downtown. Now, one of the things I wanted to show, that this is what I'm demoing in right now, and so there will be a few bugs, is the beta build, which was finished this morning. So we'll have CityEngine 2018.0 beta out probably either tomorrow morning or Monday morning. If you're interested in giving it a try, definitely grab my card on your way out. Be happy to give you a beta license so you can give it a try. But one of the things we added last year was this concept of scenario management. So I've got this is existing condition, but I've got a scenario here, scenario 1, where we're replacing that building with a taller building. Scenario 2, we're replacing it with a different style building. We've actually refined this scenario experience. We used to have like a special scenario manager, but now it's all captured in scene. You can manage many scenarios in scene. So for instance, I can duplicate this scenario. I'm going to call this scenario 3, right? And now I've kind of separated these two things. I'm going to say, okay, let's make this a much taller building and make it 30 floors high with a 22 floor high base. So now I've got my skyscraper here that I'm proposing in downtown, and I can just flip back between the scenarios. I can also mirror features between scenarios. So I might have one set of buildings that participates in all the scenarios, and I want to make a change to that building, like I changed the cladding, or change the size of the window, or I change the usage profile. I want every scenario to represent that. So I can link them together, or I can make them all independent and separate as I do it. The other thing that we added is, I showed the visibility analysis that we added. We've improved that this year, so I'm going to create a new view shed. So I'm going to drop an observer on this intersection, and I'm going to put him out here so he goes all the way through the building. Going to make this slightly taller so it catches all the building. So this is a live view shed analysis. This is not like geoprocessing tools. I'm going to prove it. So if I grab this and move this around, right, you can see we're generating the view shed all on the fly now. So the other thing that we added that I think is really cool this year is, you'll notice now in the inspector on the right side, we're showing you what the view shed is looking at. We're showing which layers it's seeing. So this bar chart here represents how much of what is visible. And then I can see that this proposed building is taking up 6.4% of my view. If I change to a different alternative, right, it updates 2.7% of my view, or 3.1% of my view. So I can use this as a tool to measure visual prominence of individual features, and use that as a guide for when I'm either selecting selecting a scenario or actually modifying and editing and changing a scenario. And that's the vision for all these interactive tools, is that you can use them live inside the designs themselves. Okay, so talked about the urban transects and some of the open space rules there. Where we are releasing rules as part of this, what's called the Rule of the Week effort. So we have this Parks Formal and Parks Natural rule available right now. And you can actually go to YouTube and do a search for Rule of the Week, and it gives you a little video about each rule, what it does, and a little background, and a link to download it. So if you're interested, definitely something on taking a look at. We're also trying to add to our library of assets that you can use directly out of CityEngine. We have an existing library of trees. We're going to expand that this year with some really, really nice looking trees. And then we have a library of features, so cars, construction equipment, street furniture, different models of people that you can readily use, and they're open license, so you can just go nuts with them and use them to make your 3D scenes. So I want to touch on a last use case here about that kind of combines all these things together. It's using procedural buildings, procedural streets, procedural open space. And this was done by Hazel Levine in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. So they were working on the Sawdust District Redevelopment Plan for downtown Oshkosh, which is pretty cool. They developed a conceptual plan, proposed a bunch of change. They were going to put in a new stadium for the local basketball team. They were going to put in a new corporate headquarters for the company Oshkosh. The proposal actually got accepted, and they started building it. So this is the bare site, right? Start putting up the buildings, right? And actually built the buildings. So it actually made change on the ground. And within 18 months, the Wisconsin Herd, which is their basketball team, was playing games at the site. But they ran into a little bit of a snag. So Oshkosh said, hey, wow, look at your downtown design. It's very progressive and urban and not very natural, and there's not enough open space for what we want. So they went to the city and said, hey, we're going to go look for a new place to have our corporate headquarters and move out of your city. And so the city said, wait, hold on, we'll figure out something, like, what are your requirements? What do you need? And they said, well, we need 40 acres of open space and green space around our headquarters. And so they did the analysis of what was available in town, and the only thing that met the criteria was the municipal golf course. And of course, that was, immediately the thought was, well, that's a no-fly. We're not going to tear out the golf course. And then they started looking at the numbers of usership and how people were actually using golf courses. And they said, well, actually, let's consider this. So the city went back to them and said, hey, come up with a plan. What would this look like if we transitioned this golf course from a golf course to a corporate headquarters combined with a large amount of public open space? So they went and did their sketching, conceptual sketching in SketchUp, brought that into CityEngine, applied some rules to it, created a representation and a model that they could share with the city, gave that out as a plan, and then shared it out as a web scene that the public could touch and interact with and explore interactively as a set of published services from CityEngine. And that one turned out really well. The Oshkosh decided to stay, and that's where their corporate headquarters are going to be, is they're going to repurpose the municipal golf course into a large public open space. So a good example. And I have one more example. This one's a little bit of a weird one. The Nature Conservancy approached us and said, hey, we have a problem. Climate change is going to increase, is going to cause sea level rise. And in Indonesia, there's a large number of communities that exist right on the water, and they're right down in that sub 1 meter range. And they said, we need a strategy for building dams. And these dams are going to capture sediment, and they need to be colonized by mangroves. And these mangroves are going to provide protection from erosion for these coastal communities that live at these really low-lying areas. How do we visualize this? We know what a dam looks like. We know what the deposition patterns are going to be because we're doing the analysis on it. So we wrote a little procedural rule and allowed them to push the change that their dam was making through and then populate whether an area was going to get a mangrove or not based on the depth it was, based on the deposition that was being caused by the dam. So kind of a very odd use of procedural. Wasn't urban at all. They just wanted to create this representation of what happens if, how do we protect these, and then use that as a design tool so they could make decisions about where to put their dams, and then actually show this to communities and say, hey, this is what we want to build near you, here's why, and here's what it's going to do. So a little bit of a different approach. Let's see, I have enough for 4 minutes of, let's see. Okay, so in the end, where is CityEngine going? So CityEngine is a tool for creating projects and plans, master plans and specific plans on development, and that needs a place to live. So what we're talking about is developing a new system called ArcGIS Urban. And the idea is that it has a context to report on city performance, right? You can create and share plans for change, comprehensive plans or small scale zoning plans. It'll store proposed projects, and you can assess those projects for impacts, and you can share those internally with your stakeholders, externally with the community, and then you can do collaborative decision making. So all this is prototype. I'm just going to say that, but we can take a look, and this is kind of what we're thinking. So here we have a city. We have all of our buildings. Those buildings are classified by their zoning. We're generating metrics based on that zoning, the number of jobs they create, the number of people. We can see the disposition of the zones. We can look at the projects that are going to go in the area. We can see, based on our projects and our comprehensive plans, what our trends look like for total population, what the distribution of that population is going to be, where that population is going to be concentrated in terms of density, right, in this interactive way. We can actually drill down into that and look at where the jobs are going to be, what sectors those jobs are going to be in, what's the demographic breakdown of different jobs by race, by gender. It's all live, so when you touch a graph, it actually gives you metrics, and you can move it forward, backwards, in future. So if you can imagine, it's kind of a comprehensive place where we can go to get information about our city and then start making decisions on how we're going to change our city by adding plans or projects. So now I actually want to make changes. So I have a different interface, right, where I'm actually managing plans and projects collectively. So here I'm looking at the city. Again, I'm looking at indicators of different kinds of concentrations, population, jobs, and waste on top of wastewater production on top of a land use layer. I can zoom into an individual project. I could open the story map about that project and explore it. I could edit it and make changes to it, right? I have multiple scenarios. You'll notice the scenarios look very similar to what we see in CityEngine. It's going to be mirrored here. Create a new scenario because I want to create change, right? Select these zoning polygons interactively, right? Create a list, find a different kind of zoning type that I want to assign to them and reassign them to a new zone. And the indicators on the right change, right? Existing condition, scenario 1, they go down, scenario 2, they go up, right? It's all interactive and giving me these metrics on the fly. Now I actually want to see or game what that change is going to look like. So I select a set of parcels, right? I apply the zoning codes to those parcels, and I actually generate what could be built on that site. So tilt down into a perspective view. So this is using the procedural technology, but in the browser to actually generate representations based on zoning regulation. I can change that. So I change the max height. It regenerates procedurally in this little browser application, and I see what that max build out might look like. And then I could edit a story map and create the story map around it, or share to VR, or launch the project in CityEngine and edit and modify it further. Right, again, a way to manage these things collectively. Or I could crack open an individual project, and the projects have project pages and have all these metrics and information around it. It's a way to express what this project is going to be and measure metrics on it, and also share that with the public. And then how do I actually share this out? So we want to be able to, of course, share in the story map, share in a VR experience, but also in a collaborative experience where you have multiple people looking at the same time, but they're not in the same room. Maybe it's a digital town hall, right? So here I have two people who are working together. They're looking at a set of proposed buildings. You see one person, you see the observer's location and where they're looking in each side so that they can coordinate what they're looking at, right? They have a shared chat window so they can communicate back and forth. You know, I know you're looking at a building, but I don't know which one. Can you figure out, help me figure out which building you're actually looking at or which one you're talking about that you don't like in this proposed design. So right, I say, oh, it's this building, right? Pops up and highlights, oh, that's the building you're talking about. Yeah, I want to go look at that. Great. Or I want to jump to your view. So this is a way of kind of starting to do collaborative feedback sessions online. So this is just it's something we've just started working on. These are just some of the prototypes of some of the things we want to include. So I don't know if I would love to hear feedback on whether that's something that you think is interesting or useful to you guys. So with that, I'll open it up for questions. And I apologize if that was like drinking through a fire hose a little bit too much at once. Let me see. Get back to. I swear I have a question slide at the end. So, any question? Yeah.
Any possibility of merging BIMs with this, so that you can see from the outside that a technical or a possible BIM model placed in there somewhere?
Yes. So I mean, we have the collaboration with Autodesk. One of the things we're looking at is BIM as a data source. There's a couple implementations of that. One is being able to use Revit directly as a data source inside the desktop technology. I'm sure you've heard a fair bit about that. But the other one is to start being able to publish things out of the Autodesk cloud as Esri services, and you can then bring in and consume in multiple products. So the idea is in CityEngine, you could bring it in. You could actually have like a BIM scene service that's dedicated to sharing BIM data. Bring that in to get that BIM context in ArcGIS Urban or ArcGIS Pro or CityEngine. So yeah, that is something that we're working on right now. Any other questions? Yep.
To use the Esri tool that's provided online, is there any example tool or like template to clean up the local street map?
So you're asking if there's good templates for cleaning up OpenStreetMap? No, just your local street map. Yeah, I mean there's a set of editing workflows for street cleaning and maintenance as part of the local government data model, and their street maintenance package that's done on ArcGIS desktop. So that's probably the place I would start is looking at their street maintenance workflows. Yeah, it's a solution on top of the ArcGIS desktop product. So if you go to the local government webpage, they have all their solutions listed there. So they're the ones that are going to have the best workflow. There also might be some good tutorials as part of the network analyst courses for cleaning up networks specifically for use in the network analyst extension. Any other questions? Okay, well, if you have any more questions, I'm happy to answer them one-on-one. We are going to launch that beta in the next I don't know, what is it, 72 hours or so. So if you're interested, come up. I'll give you my card. Drop me an email, and we'll add you guys to the beta. Give it a test. Thank you very much.